Bring in show music, please.
This is Squawk Pod from CNBC, and I'm producer Cameron Costa. On today's episode, the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump. A tragic day in American history and a moment of reflection on the vitriol of U.S. politics.
Disagreement is inevitable in American democracy. It's part of human nature. But politics must never be a literal battlefield.
Pennsylvania Republican Senate candidate David McCormick was in the front row at the rally in Butler.
It was almost unthinkable, but then when it became clear that the staccato was, in fact, rifle shots.
Donald Trump saved by an inch. McCormick says the United States is also inches away from its own demise.
It's hard to imagine that this environment of nastiness and dehumanizing rhetoric doesn't contribute to violence.
Both sides of the aisle calling to roll back political hostility. Co-chair of President Biden's campaign, Senator Chris Coons.
I'm grateful that President Biden sees this as a moment to reduce the temperature, and if at the RNC we hear a change in tone and temperature from speakers, I think that would be a constructive thing too.
It's Monday, July 15th, 2024, and Squawk Pod begins right now.
Stand Becky by in 3, 2, 1. Cue it, please.
Good morning and welcome to Squawk Box right here on CNBC. We are live from the NASDAQ market site in Times Square. I'm Becky Quick along with Joe Kernan and Andrew Ross Sorkin. Monday morning, lots to talk about.
Former President Trump now arriving in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. This, of course, a day after he was targeted in an attempted assassination. Eamon Javers joins us now this morning.
The former president, as you say, is now here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we are gearing up for a big day at the Republican National Convention. One question on everybody's mind is whether we'll see a vice presidential announcement from the former president of the United States, and whether that could come as soon as today. It has to happen this week, so we're running out of days where that announcement could happen. Going back to last night, we heard from the President of the United States, Joe Biden, in Washington. In only his third Oval Office address to the nation, the president urged peace and calm and said we cannot enter an era of political violence. Here's what President Joe Biden said last night.
The power to change America should always rest in the hands of the people, not in the hands of a would-be assassin. You know, the path forward through competing visions of the campaign should always be resolved peacefully, not through acts of violence. All of us now face a time of testing as the election approaches. And the higher the stakes, the more fervent the passions become. This places an added burden on each of us to ensure that no matter how strong our convictions, we must never descend into violence. There is no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized.
Now, what we know about the FBI investigation into the shooting so far is the FBI says, as of now, no known motive here for this shooter. They're trying to figure out whether there's an ideology associated with him or not. So far, the investigation, they say, indicates that the shooter acted alone, but they are trying to determine whether there were any co-conspirators involved in this attack. They say they've identified that the firearm involved was purchased legally. They've obtained the shooter's phone as well. They're trying to get into that. As of yesterday, guys, they said that they had not gotten access to the phone. They're trying to crack the passcode there, and they're working with a company, they wouldn't say which company, to help them do that. That could be a treasure trove of evidence as to the shooter's whereabouts, his intents, his communications, all of the information that the FBI is trying to figure out right now to figure out exactly how this happened. And of course now questions swirling in terms of security and the preparations by the Secret Service. How did this shooter manage to get that close to the president, former president of the United States with a weapon and get shots off in his direction? That is a big mystery as of this morning. There's some questions about whether or not that rooftop where the shooter was located should have been secured by the Secret Service or by local law enforcement. The President of the United States last night saying he's going to ask for an independent investigation as to what happened. Meanwhile, here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we are seeing tight security here. But guys, I've got to say, as we look around the perimeter here, this security at this event feels just like the security we've seen at major events in the past. This is about as tight as you can get in terms of security and still have a convention. That's what it's going to be like all week, and we'll bring you all the news as we get it.
That's definitely going to be something that we watch, Eamon, and that is people try to figure out how you couldn't secure what is not that big of a radius. You should be able to secure a radius really twice as large as what encompassed that building. And you've
Right.
looked at it. There are like 3 spots. If you wanted to try and do that, there were like 3 prime spots. That might have been the prime spot to be. And there's a ladder, and it's just, it's outrageous.
You do wonder, Joe,
and
if
it's very odd.
Yeah. You do wonder if the explanation is some kind of communication gap between the Secret Service and local law enforcement in terms of who's responsible for that rooftop and which area of jurisdiction that falls into. It may be something as human and simple as a miscommunication between the law enforcement agencies as to whose responsibility that was. But we do see a report from the Associated Press that a local law enforcement officer went up on the roof and the shooter menaced him with a gun. The law enforcement officer ducked down behind the edge of the roof in order to preserve his own life, and then the shooting transpired after that. So we're going to have to get a very clear timeline as to how quickly that all happened, because this may have happened very, very quickly. It may be the case that the shooter went up there, the police identified him, he got off his shots within seconds or very few minutes, which does not give law enforcement a lot of time to respond.
Right, or the policeman even told someone, and then the law enforcement snipers were trained on the shooter, but that could have been it too. And whether they were told not to it would be ridiculous to wait to take the guy out when we know that it was within it was inches that the world will be totally turned upside down right now if it had ended. If that little head turn to look at the. To look at what was a chart about immigration, believe it or not, it was crazy. I don't know whether you were watching live, Eamon, but it was unbelievable to be watching it. I just happened to be watching it with the family, and those kind of things. It's one of those
things where history
like
just turns on a dime. And
I don't remember JFK. I remember MLK and RFK, it's vivid in my mind, but. You would hope no one has to see that live, and everything's live nowadays. I mentioned it almost reminded me of the movie Network, that everything is live, everything you got to see. You have coverage of all these things as they're happening. It's frightening. Thanks, Eamon.
Yeah. Well, and now the question is, how does all this play into the presidential race? As you guys have been talking about this morning, the expectation is that this will give a significant boost to the former president, Donald Trump. How does the Biden campaign respond to that? Just so many questions. We're really an unprecedented, pivotal moment in American history right now, Joe.
Yep. All right. Thanks, Eamon. And here's a look at a couple of things. Moves in the shares of Trump Media this morning. It closed about 30.31 on Friday. It's bidding 46.50 this morning. That's quite a move. Indicated almost 52%. And the predicted betting contract for former President Trump to win the November election surging to 67 cents at this point. And if you're wondering who's in second place, it's now firmly back to President Biden. And if you look at predicted Dem nominee, that's been flipping back and forth, but it's solidly in President Biden's camp.
Well, to me, the question, though, is whether President Biden is still going to be the nominee come November at this point.
But the betting sites have him, but who knows? I mean,
but to me, the bigger shift is, even if you think he steps out, it may be less attractive today for a Gavin Newsom or a Governor Whitmer, or you name your person on the Democratic side, given, I think, what has catapulted former President Trump into this lead, that it changes the dynamic.
Oh, you mean that they wouldn't want to?
It's because I'm not sure you want to be in a losing. You don't want to be on the losing side of things.
I've never seen any indication that President Biden has any doubts about staying. I've never seen anything.
I think that if you take him at his word, which maybe you do, maybe you don't, that he believes that he's the only person who can beat Trump, and at some point he starts to look at the polls and sees where they are. But as I said, if you actually look at those polls and sees where you are, the next sort of iteration of that, I think, becomes much more complicated in terms of who actually could step in. I mean, we could talk about whether, it's the Kamala Harris and she get passed over and all of those issues, but even just this dynamic, I think, fundamentally
Who steps into the
changes the thing. Is there a perfect person? I'll tell you a new name that I keep hearing about, who probably doesn't have the name recognition, but I think is very interesting for this moment. Mark Kelly, Arizona. His wife obviously was shot. He's an astronaut. He's a military man. He's in a swing state. There's a lot of very interesting things about him. Having said that, it becomes very complicated again because he doesn't have the name recognition. And again, do you think you're on the losing side
President
of it?
Biden's in the driver's seat. He would have to decide not to do it. And even when you hear that there's people somewhere around him, they're always in the outer orbits when they concede that maybe he won't. Anybody in the inner circle hasn't shown the slightest inclination to even consider him
look,
stepping in.
there have been things that have laid out what would happen at convention where the delegates would decide not to go for him, but there has not been a candidate that all of those delegates could coalesce around. So it doesn't particularly.
And he had some solid, and he's been sort of strutting his stuff, or at least attempting to.
He's got an interview tonight with Lester Holt.
Yeah.
Cheese will be next.
Next on Squawk Pod, a man who was at the campaign rally where Donald Trump was shot. Pennsylvania Republican Senate candidate David McCormick is putting America's political rhetoric under scrutiny.
You got to stop suggesting that President Trump isn't the legitimate leader of the Republican Party. You can't, call him Hitler. You can't refer to him as Satan.
More calls to lower the political temperature in the United States, and later, how the assassination attempt affects President Biden's campaign. We'll be right back. Welcome back to CNBC's Squawk Pod with Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin, and our next guest who was at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, on his way up to the stage when the attempted assassination on Donald Trump's life began. Here's Joe.
Stand by, Joe. His mic, cue.
Joining us now, GOP Pennsylvania candidate Dave McCormick, who was at Saturday's rally, sitting in the front row when the assassination attempt on former president took place. And it's good to see you, David. And in fact, just 2 seconds ago, Becky and I were talking about the reaction and how I don't think anybody really knows what the reaction would be to something like that. You're an Iraq or a Gulf War veteran. You're familiar with gunshots and everything else. But I mean, it was still a little bit surprising. And the fire chief, I'd like to think I would do that at my age. I think I'd try to jump on top of my family if I could. But you just don't know until it happens. And I think that former President Trump rose to the occasion, maybe surprised a lot of people, maybe surprised himself. I don't know.
Yeah, it was remarkable in the sense. Just imagine you're shot. You're under fire. The Secret Service sort of tackled him and covered him, and then he gets to his feet and he's in that phalanx and he has the presence of mind to recognize that he wants to. He's both defiant and reassuring, and I was really taken aback by how much strength and presence he showed in the moment. I think that felt the need to reassure people he was okay. And if 100 people were under that circumstances, I'm not sure how many would be able to rise to the occasion as the president did. And it's the same with Corey Compatore, who you mentioned, the man that put his body to shield his family. And it's just a tragic day. And imagine had the bullet just been in 1 inch in the other direction, we would have lost the president. And that is just almost hard to fathom, almost unthinkable. But we were that close. So I think it's a moment of pause and reflection and kind of put things back in perspective and just be very grateful that the president was able to survive, and also be very, very grateful or very, prayerful for those that lost their lives and those that are still fighting back from being wounded during that horrible, horrible day.
He was barely into the speech. I was watching, and I honestly thought, he always goes off teleprompter, and he didn't know whether they had that chart of immigration built, and that is why he kind of looked. He was looking up at that and moved his head a little bit. That could have made a difference. I also thought he almost called you up.
Yeah.
He said you were going to come up later. He almost called you up spontaneously right then, and I was looking forward to hearing what you were going to say on top of everything else, and that never came to pass.
we had a conversation before when he first got there. We were in the back, and he was, the crowd was incredible. It was only my second Trump rally, but I mean, there was an enormous enthusiasm and patriotism, and he was very excited about it. And he said, "Hey, I want to call you up on the stage." And when he got out there, he started, got right into his introduction and started to talk about my race and asked me to come up. So I started to walk up, and then he said, no, let me show this chart and I'll have you come up in a little bit. He said that to the crowd. And then just a minute or two later, the shots were fired. And it was the kind of thing, it was almost unthinkable. But then when it became clear that the staccato was in fact rifle shots, the president dropped to his knees and the Secret Service was there. And at the same time, it became clear that over my left shoulder in the bleachers, someone had been shot and was wounded and in bad shape. And, so you had this sort of unbelievable moment where everybody was hunkered down trying to make sure we didn't, have further people injured, and the president was ushered off the stage. So it was all very, very hard to digest in the moment, very confusing. But the crowd was very calm, confused but very calm. No stampeding. Everybody just wanting to make sure that the president and everybody else that was affected was okay.
Hey, Dave, it's Andrew here. How do you think this changes the tone, if it does at all, of what we'll hear either from President Trump or others during the Republican National Convention? Do you think that it changes the tone of things, if it does at all, permanently or just only temporarily?
I don't know. It's too early to tell. I was really encouraged by the statement President Trump put out, and the graciousness and sort of laying out a path on unity. And I think I hope it will have people step back and reflect. The political rhetoric that we see and we've seen growing is really it's really concerning. It's hard to imagine that this environment of nastiness and dehumanizing rhetoric doesn't contribute to violence. And
Dave, the entire playbook of the Biden campaign is going to have to change, isn't it? I mean, you can't say dictator, end of democracy, his supporters are subhuman. None of those things ring true anymore, do they?
No, it's not true. I tried to make this point in an op-ed I just wrote, which is you got to stop suggesting that President Trump isn't the legitimate leader of the Republican Party. You can't call him Hitler. You can't refer to him as Satan, and you have to recognize that he is the leader of a party and a movement that is the essence of democracy and the support he's getting. And we should have a real battle about ideas because the ideas of the left and the ideas of the right now, the ideas of the Democratic Party are dramatically different. And we should resolve our conflict. The conflict's big, so we can't pretend we don't have big differences, but we need to resolve that conflict in elections and through in a civil way and through policy. And so what I want to say is, like, on the campaign trail, listen, there's going to be big conflict, and there should be. That's what our country's all about, is finding the direction. And we're at a really perilous moment, but we need not resort to dehumanizing rhetoric that creates an environment where candidates are truly at risk. And I've never thought about that much for myself, to be honest with you. And I didn't even really think about it at the rally, even after the shooting, that I was in danger. But when I got home and had a chance to connect with my daughters by text, or 6 of them by text or by phone, they're terrified, because it never occurred to them that just the act of running for public office would put me in harm's way. And it shouldn't affect anybody that way. We need to step back, ratchet back the rhetoric, and have a real battle for ideas, because the future of the country depends on it.
Yeah, David, just back to Andrew's point, though, do you think this is lasting? Because it has been very heartening. I think this is what America has been hoping for, to take the temperature down and really talk about policies. Is this lasting, especially as you get into a contentious race?
Well, I really hope so. I really hope so, that it'll be upon all of us to lead by example. But I think you have to differentiate between tough, hard-hitting campaigning that shows differences and contrast from rhetoric that suggest that the only way that you can win is have the opposition go away. And so I think we need to steer away from that kind of rhetoric. I certainly am not going to participate in that kind of rhetoric. And I'm really heartened by the environment we see in general, where people across parties, and certainly the President Trump and President Biden, are both trying to set the tone that will prevail for the rest of the campaign. I hope that's the case. I think it's an opportunity.
How's your race going? Do you do internal polling? Or do you think you'll get any down ballot? I mean, I can't believe all this was in Pennsylvania, and you were in the front row, Dave?
I was right in the front row. I'm not sure about the politics of this, to be honest with you. I think what was clear is in this moment of crisis, and when the president was at, his life truly in jeopardy, he really showed a lot of strength, resolve, a lot of strength of character. And I think that's certainly an iconic image that has to be in the mind of voters. How that'll affect the actual campaign, how it'll affect other candidates, I'm not sure. And I feel great about my race. I feel like this is a moment where voters are saying we have a real choice. And what I say on the campaign trail is if you think the status quo is okay, if you think we're on a good path, then you should vote for my opponent, Senator Casey. He's been there a long time. He's voted with President Biden 98% of the time. If you think we need to make really significant changes on the border, on economic policy, on criminal justice, on America's role in the world, on energy policy, then pick me. I'm your guy, because I'm very committed to making big changes and trying to get our country in a direction that really works for all Americans, all working families, all Pennsylvanians.
Would you expect? I don't know what happens with former President Trump's numbers, but there has been a lot of talk about down ballot damage, perhaps to some Democrats. Do you expect that? Are you hoping for that to happen to get you across the finish line?
Well, certainly, I'm hoping and expecting to win. President Trump on the ballot certainly has been a really strong asset, and Pennsylvania is on the verge of becoming red. The difference of registration between Democrats and Republicans has narrowed dramatically in the last couple years, and President Trump on the top of the ticket is going to be a big asset. But I got to go run my campaign and prevail with voters that are Republicans, voters that are independents, voters that are conservative Democrats, and build that coalition. I think there's a really clear path. I think that path gets clearer, and I'm more optimistic every day. But I got to run my campaign, and certainly President Trump at the top is going to be a help.
Okay. All right. I get that was pretty good speech. I don't know. Now we got to give equal time. Probably we got to ask your opponent on probably at some point, Dave. But I don't think he was there at the rally, though, was he? You didn't notice him.
He wasn't there.
No. Yeah. What a weekend. What a development. And it's haunting. And you were right there. You actually could hear the bullets whizzing. It's a frightening sound that you probably were familiar with.
Yeah, you could definitely. It was the staccato. It wasn't clear to me whether there was one shooter or two shooters, to be honest with you. And while it was clear we were rifle shots, it's hard to tell where they're coming from. So
right. I did speak to President Trump yesterday, and that's one of the things I did say to him was that, did you know there was not a second shooter, or did you know that the first one was neutralized? Because he sort of, once you stand up from the bulletproof podium, you're exposed again. And I didn't think he just wanted to get out that message of resolve. Yeah. I think
he did. I think he did, and I think he had we should ask ourselves, Joe, if under the same circumstances.
No, I don't want to. Right. I don't want to ask myself that. I don't think I'd like the answer.
Dave, what was your sense of the Secret Service and just the security? I know we've been praising the Secret Service to some degree for what they did in the moment, but yeah. Clearly what led to this moment, I think, is under question.
Yeah, I mean, they were very responsive in the moment, on top of the president almost immediately. But, you couldn't look at this and think anything other than an epic failure. The fact that a shooter could get within that proximity The idea that the person could get off those shots, somehow get through the security screening. So, when I came in to the area, I was, I was wanded to make sure I was clear, and I came in through a special entrance, but the security looked fine, but clearly an epic failure. I mean, this isn't even a close call. This is a disastrous failure, and it's going to require a real investigation for how this could possibly have happened. And adjustments to make sure it could never happen again. But it was a real disaster.
Dave, does this shift your thinking at all on guns? You and I have talked about this over the years. I have a view which you, I think, disagree with, but this was an AR-15, or at least appears to be one. Most of these shootings in America with AR-15s by young people, someone who's 20 years old, you can almost plot it on a map just how this seems to happen. And I do wonder whether there are sensible things that we can do. Not just from a security perspective, but more broadly about preventing, violence of this sort.
You and I do probably disagree on that a bit, Andrew. I'm a strong Second Amendment person, but to be honest with you, at this point, we're just 24 hours past, and there's so much to learn. So I'm resisting the urge to get into any specific discussions around policies until we know exactly what happened. And I think the one thing we certainly do know is that the political environment and the rhetoric is conducive to encouraging violence. And when you see what's happened in recent years, not just with the attempt on President Trump's life, but with Steve Scalise, with the threats on our Supreme Court justices, with the attack on Paul Pelosi, you could go on and on. There's just no place in America, no place in our country for rhetoric that encourages or creates violent behavior, and we need to, I think, use this moment as an opportunity to reflect on that. So that's where I'm focused at the moment.
Dave McCormick, thank you for joining us this morning.
Coming up, calls from the other side of the aisle to lower the nation's political temperature. Co-chair of the Biden campaign and Delaware Senator Chris Coons on the assassination attempt investigations now underway. And the Republican National Convention kicks off today. So where does President Biden stand a month out from his party's convention?
There's been polling that shows lots of folks would like someone else, but we had a robust primary process and nobody else succeeded. Joe Biden won overwhelmingly.
Squawk Pod will be right back. You're listening to Squawk Pod. Here's Becky Quick.
As we've heard this morning, President Biden calling for unity last night in the wake of the assassination attempt of former President Trump. In an Oval Office address, Biden condemned political violence, saying politics must never become a literal battlefield. Joining us right now is Delaware Democratic Senator Chris Coons. He is the co-chair of the Biden presidential campaign. And Chris, we've heard the same thing from President Trump. It sounds like he may be rewriting his speech and calling for unity as well. If that's the case, would be something if this can really stick. What do you think in the wake of what happened? It was shocking to see former President Trump targeted in such a way, actually shot.
So, Becky, this is a moment for all of us to reflect on where we're headed as a nation. I am so grateful that former President Trump is safe, that our President Joe Biden dedicated an Oval Office address to denouncing political violence, urging that we reduce the tempo and the temperature of our speaking about each other in campaigns. And I'll remind you, it was Joe Biden in his inaugural address who said that we need to view our political opponents not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. I think it is a great blessing that we are in this place today, not waking up, confronting the horror of a successful assassination. And so I am grateful to the state troopers and the Secret Service who acted promptly, mourn the loss of a volunteer fire chief, a father of two who died protecting his family, Mr. Campore, I believe, of Western Pennsylvania. And the Senate Homeland Security Committee is going to promptly begin investigating the security failures that led to that attempt. It is shocking that a a lone 20-year-old gunman with no clear agenda or purpose was able to scale a roof and take shots and kill someone and wound several others and very nearly kill former President Trump. So I'm grateful that President Biden sees this as a moment to reduce the temperature. And if at the RNC we hear a change in tone and a temperature from speakers, I think that would be a constructive thing too. Becky, we've had too many close calls in the time that I've been in the Senate. I'll never forget Jeff Flake, my close friend, coming back into the Capitol in his blood-stained baseball uniform. I'll never forget the episode with Speaker Pelosi's husband being brutally attacked and hospitalized. And Gabby Giffords has been a dear friend since before the attack that left her permanently injured. But her bravery in recovering from the assassination attempt on her is something that's inspired many of us. We have had too many close calls, and I'm hopeful that we will pivot and move to a different kind of political tone in our nation today.
Steve Scalise actually shot in that baseball game that you referenced. Senator, I appreciate what you say about the message that President Biden has put out today, but while that may have been a message he originally used 4 years ago, it's one that the Democratic Party has strayed from as well. There has been a lot of rhetoric. There has been very hot sort of attacks on character that have come up. And I guess I wonder how much this new unity movement lasts, how long you expect to see that last, especially as we get into a very hot political election.
Well, that's up to us. Yesterday, I reached out to some of my colleagues with whom I've been active in the Senate prayer breakfast. We meet every Wednesday morning. It's facilitated by our Senate chaplain. When I first got to the Senate, there were 24 members who came faithfully every Wednesday. It is bipartisan. We represent the broadest range of backgrounds and views of members of the Senate. And it's how I've built some of my close friendships. And I do think we have an opportunity to not just briefly reflect a moment, but to try and serve as role models of how we can treat each other and respect each other in the Senate and how we conduct ourselves and how we speak about each other.
Senator, I've thought it was my thinking that the president has stabilized his status as the nominee, but Andrew makes some really good points about numbers, and I don't know whether it's fundraising or if it was, I don't know, Andrew, if it was poll numbers. There's still a convention coming up, and there are some attractive. Well, Andrew has some candidates that he thinks could maybe beat Donald Trump, I think.
Well, no, I think the question, Senator, is, look, the president has said repeatedly that the only reason he's in this race is because he genuinely believes he is the only person in this entire country who can beat former President Trump. If, in fact, the polls move away from Biden meaningfully, and I don't know what you think meaningfully is, but and I know they were tight as of last week. However, clearly Biden was still losing. I imagine this is going to change that dynamic to some degree. I don't know if you agree with that, but if it does, do you think that there is some shift inside the party that says that we should try some kind of other alternative? And I don't know if there is an other alternative, who you think that is.
Well, Andrew, thanks for the question. As you know, poll after poll, head-to-head, shows that this race has not moved, and that there haven't been some significant shifts in the head-to-head polls. Part of what we've always expected this coming week is a bounce for former President Trump. That's part of why conventions have become sort of televised national platform moments for candidates. So if former President Trump, both as a result of sympathy after this shocking event in Butler, Pennsylvania, and as a result of a week-long opportunity to present his views and his platform, if he comes out of the convention in a stronger position, that's what we expected all along. The same should happen for the Democratic Party and for our nominee, Joe Biden. There are vigorous discussions within my caucus. But as of today, there's one Democratic senator who's come out and said he thinks that President Biden should step aside for another candidate. And I'll remind you, not to put too sharp a point on it, but there's 5 sitting Republican senators who've said, at least said as of last week, that they would not vote for Donald Trump. I do think that there's widespread unhappiness in the country about these two candidates. That's true. There's been polling that shows lots of folks would like someone else, but we had a robust primary process and nobody else succeeded. Joe Biden won overwhelmingly. We believe in democracy, and so we're going to a convention with virtually all of the delegates pledged to Joe Biden.
You know, if you look at some of the implied numbers on something like Betfair, predict it's a different thing, but you could look, even a Gavin Newsom looks today like he would beat a former President Trump. Obviously, Michelle Obama would beat former President Trump. There were some Democratic donors over the weekend talking about whether Mark Kelly, who has a fascinating background, both as a military man, astronaut, and of course, given what happened to his wife being shot, has dealt with some of these issues. Whether there are other people in this country, if beating Donald Trump is the goal of the Democrats, whether they need to think differently.
Andrew, there's a whole generation of promising and compelling younger leaders who've got a breadth of experience, whether in the Senate or as governors, who are campaigning hard for Joe Biden, who serve as either leaders in their state, in our caucus, or as co-chairs of the campaign. Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, is one of the co-chairs of the campaign. Tammy Duckworth, senator from Illinois, is one of the co-chairs of the campaign. Veronica Escobar from Texas, one of the co-chairs of the campaign. Lisa Blunt Rochester, I believe soon to be the next senator from Delaware, one of our campaign co-chairs. I could go on. These are folks who represent that next generation and who I think have real potential for the future. But where we are right now is that last week was the NATO summit. President Biden masterfully managed 31 other heads of state from our NATO allies and partners. He's doing what my caucus members have said he needs to do. An hour-long press conference last week where he spoke calmly, knowledgeably, thoroughly about our place in the world and the things that will contribute to our security, stability, and economic growth, also while doing campaign events in the middle of the day. He's not just the leader of the free world, he's leading the free world. And our stock market's at an all-time high. Inflation is coming down. We have the lowest unemployment for the longest period of my lifetime. We are the world's leading energy producer, both renewables and fossil. We're in a very strong place. So look, our president's going to be doing a long interview with Lester Holt, I believe, this evening, and was going to be giving a speech today that I was going to join him at. But appropriately, given how somber this moment is, he's pulled down campaign advertising and campaign events like the speech he was to give in Texas today. I respect Joe Biden's character, his leadership, and his record. And folks are free to have a different opinion. We have a number of weeks before our convention. It's July. There is a long time between now and the election. I support Joe Biden, and I respect those who have other views. And I think what they're going to see tonight on the Lester Holt interview is what they saw at campaign rallies in Michigan and Pennsylvania and North Carolina, which is a president with a strong record, a clear-eyed vision, and committed to bringing our country together and to restoring the soul of our nation. That's what moved him to run, and that's largely why I believe he won in 2020 and why I'm optimistic he can do so again this fall.
Senator Coons, thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
That does it for Squawk Pod today. Thank you for listening, and please make sure you tune in tomorrow. Squawk Box is hosted by Joe Kernan, Becky Quick, and Andrew Ross Sorkin, weekday mornings on CNBC starting at 6 a.m. Eastern. To get the smartest takes and analysis from that TV show right into your ears, follow Squawk Pod wherever you're listening now. We'll meet you back here tomorrow.
We are clear. Thanks, guys.